there should be an option for Forest simply to just buy the freehold from you. Is that on the table?
That's a question. That's been on the table all along. That there were two sides to this story, and that really, that this story will come out in due course.
Afternoon, everybody. Hope you're doing well, and welcome to this special podcast or event where we're going to be discussing with Steve Battlemuch about the ongoing saga on the City ground and its future. Let's get into it. Steve, how are you, mate? Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good. It's a lovely sunny day in Nottingham. I hope it's like this 5:30 tomorrow.
Yeah, well, yeah. I wish we were here to talk about the game tomorrow and focus on things on the pitch, but it is what it is, and we are where we are. Guys, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Forest Fan TV if you are new. And as I said, we're going to be talking about, what's gone on in the past 24 hours with the City ground. And who better to talk to about it than with Steve. Steve, do you just want to introduce yourself to the viewers for those who may not know who you are and what you do?
Okay. I suppose I'm here mainly in the capacity that I'm a city councillor, Nottingham City Councillor, Labour councillor, and currently have executive responsibility in the council for economic development and property. So cover the sort of areas that would involve leases and sales of land, of which obviously we've got one. But my other hat that I wear and have worn for much longer than that is of a diehard Forest fan, Trent End season ticket holder. Went to my first game when I was 5, many years ago. So club at heart.
And what took you to Forest? Was it passed down from generation to generation, or just homegrown?
It was a combination. My sister took me to my first match age 5 in 1967, which subsequently I looked up in the record books was a boring 0-0 with Man U, and I stood at the front of the Trent End, and then didn't really go again until Duncan McKenzie famous Sunday game against Man City in '74. But then, so I didn't really have anybody to go with, no real big family connections. But I have got an old claim to fame, which is my uncle Jim played 32 games for Forest in the 50s at left back. So I suppose it was in the blood somewhere. And then I was lucky enough to get a season ticket in the year that we won the championship for the first time, 77-78. And when you do that, you don't turn back, because what a first season to be a season ticket holder.
Oh, to have been born in those days. But we're here, Steve, to discuss. Obviously, there's been an article released by The Athletic with Daniel Taylor, where he sat down with Tom and they've basically started discussing the future of the City ground. And there was a few quotes there that I kind of just wanted to address, a couple of highlight ones. Cartledge said that the club continues to be frustrated. The relationship with Forest is in a bit of a standoff with Nottingham City Council, who own the land. Neither the leader of the council, the CEO, nor any of the commissioners appointed by central government have reached out to the club. Nobody is knocking on the door. Nobody is trying to start a relationship again and say, how do we find a way? And in the meantime, other councils and landowners are providing opportunities that we have to consider. What were your thoughts on the article in general, and in specific what Tom was alluding to in terms of the relationship with the council?
Yeah, I mean, I wish we weren't at this point having public debates about relationships between the council and the chairman. I mean, I've tried to have a really good relationship with Tom. I spoke to him on and off for the best part of a year while I've been in this role. And so I have been speaking to him as a portfolio holder. I know that the corporate director in charge of property sales has been to meetings with him. And I know that the leader of the council has had a phone call with him. But, that's not the chief executive meeting him. I don't think the leader met him face to face. I'd say it was a phone call. The commissioners, I think it's a bit of a red herring. I mean, the commissioners have only been in for 2 months, and they don't normally take meetings with external people. They're there to advise the council and not to get involved in outside bodies. But yeah, I think, you know, it's been in the press, hasn't it, that Tom's been talking to Ben Bradley a fair bit. Ben Bradley, the leader of the county council and Conservative MP for Mansfield, he's been talking to Ben about, you know, possibilities. Well, if you believe the speculation about possibilities of a new stadium somewhere in the county.
And what was your kind of general stance on the article itself? I mean, there was a lot in there. I'm sure you had a chance to read it. Is this adding more friction into the relationship? And how are conversations going anyway between Forest and the City Council at the moment? Where do we stand?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I read the article, like I read all of Danny's articles because he's sort of, you know, he's Forest fan and he sort of talks about the club with some knowledge. But as soon as I read it and I read the fact that he hadn't got a quote in there from the City Council, I knew we had a problem. And I understand that, you know, Danny had tried to get a comment by his deadline. The council hadn't managed to meet that deadline. And subsequently, over the next, you know, 12 to 15 hours, the City Council put out a statement that has been picked up by the local papers. And that's why I did my tweet, really, because I just didn't. I saw a couple of the comments immediately under Danny's article where people were saying, "Oh, this is typical Nottingham City Council. They're broke. They can't organise anything. They're driving the club away." And I just knew that was an exaggeration of the position. So I just wanted it to be absolutely clear that there were two sides to this story, and that really, you know, that this story will come out in due course. But, you know, I prefer it not to come out in the press. I'd rather it to come out face-to-face in meetings. And there has been meetings with the club. You know, I think the last face-to-face meeting with the club was in February. You know, but the club's been talking about a new stand, as we know, since 2019. And, you know, with a new stand would become a new lease, because the lease that they've got is for the current makeup of the ground. And what they need is, you know, the land that the boat clubs are on, for example. So that changes the lease immediately, because that's land that's owned by the council as well.
Is that what's prompted the discussion then? The fact that the stadium redevelopment would require a change to the existing lease? Is that what's brought this up?
Yeah, well, the lease has got about 33 years left. And I suspect, I mean, I'm no expert in contract law and all the rest of it, but I suspect that if the club is going to borrow money to build a stand, it needs a longer lease than 33 years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So they'll want an extended lease. The City Council, if any other organisation was changing the use of the land that they had a property on that we owned, that was likely then to bring that company more money in, it's night follows day that the lease gets changed and it reflects the new value of the land.
So can we just clarify a point of fact then? So the lease at the moment, I understand, is 250,000 a year. Is that right?
Yeah, I know that the club have put the figures out into the public domain, but I really don't think that I'm in a position where I can trade figures publicly, because we wouldn't want to negotiate over the internet.
No. Okay, yeah. But would it be fair to say that if they stay put for 33 years, that lease is going to remain unchanged if they don't modify the ground? So that is an option, basically. Do nothing is 33 more years at the current lease. And this is something I've only just learned from talking to you now, that the reevaluation of the lease is a consequence of the proposed stadium redevelopment. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say that
so
obviously,
I must say, as a supporter, it's pretty frustrating to hear this when we've already been through how many rounds of planning. You know, with the problem we had with Rushcliffe Council and with the county council to get all of the planning permission to get to this stage. and then to find that something so fundamental still hasn't been resolved. I mean, you're absolutely right. Nobody's going to spend money on developing a piece of land without certainty over its future. And it just amazes me that nobody's had this conversation before now. Why would you say that is?
Well, conversations have been going on since 2019, and I think probably at one point maybe both the club and the council thought they got a deal. 2019-20, but then it could never have been signed, could it? Because if it had been signed, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So I think that deal never kind of totally got agreed. COVID then comes. The club 2 years later get promoted to the Premier League. Values change, etc., and we then get into the next round of negotiations, and what is the cost from what the council might think the land is worth based on evaluations, not back of a fag packet, but based on land valuations and stuff, against what the club think it's worth. And I kind of understand where Tom's coming from. As a fan, I understand it. He wants the city to accept that the club being on the banks of the Trent brings in income to the city, which clearly it does in terms of hospitality and overnight stays in hotels and pubs and all the rest of it. It's difficult to put an exact figure on that. People come out with different figures. Some of that money goes into the county, some of it goes into the city because of Rushcliffe and West Bridgeford and all the rest of it. But it undoubtedly is a bonus having a Premier League club on your doorstep. And I personally, as a fan, want it to stay there and I want it to be expanded. But it's hard to then say, well, because of that, you can knock off X percentage off the value of the property. And given the financial situation that the council's in, we wouldn't be having that sort of conversation with any other organisation. Forest, thankfully, at the moment, are a Premier League club. So it's not like, let's say you had a council somewhere with a League Two club and then we might be going out of business, and you might be saying, well, can we have a rent freeze while we stave off administration? Imagine there'd be very strong arguments in a council where you don't want your local club to go out of business. But I don't think we're in that ball game here, are we? We're a Premier League club with an owner that has put a hell of a lot of money in. But I think, the differences between what the club want to pay and what the council are asking, I don't think are insurmountable.
Well, can we come to that? Because I know you don't want to throw figures around, but we've heard the figure of £1 million a year mentioned. I'm not expecting you to confirm or deny that, but I think in any other walk of life, if your landlord came along and quadrupled your rent, you would probably feel that was a little bit of a shock or a little bit unfair. So, what have you got to say about that? Is it in that? Is it in that sort of degree, or is it more or less?
Yeah, you're not going to draw me into the figures.
Well, they've been widely discussed.
Not by us.
By far we can. Because Tom said. I'll just read his quote for you, Steve. He said, the rent, if you add it up for the next 33 years, comes to £9.5 million. The proposed rent the council wants us to pay over 250 years is more than 250 million. So if we're talking openly about the FA's desire for financial stability and the future of the clubs to be secure, it is simply wrong for us to sign up and put this club in a position where we have to pay 250 million in rent to stay here. So just to clarify for those who may not have heard that.
Can we just talk about the relative financial position of the club and the council? Because you alluded to both of those, Steve. So, you were aware that Forest lost £63 million last year. So,
absolutely. And there's lots of other businesses and attractions in the city that are struggling as well. And, we have some very tough conversations with organisations that are doing incredible work in the city, and putting on excellent services for people. And we have to have really tough conversations with them as well, because we're we're in a scenario in the city because of the rising costs of adult social care, children's services, homelessness, that we've had to, in effect, borrow £60 million from the government to pay day-to-day living costs of adult social care, children's, etc. And the way that the government insists on us paying that back is by us selling assets. So it's a bonkers scenario because you can only sell things once. So we're now involved in an asset sale program to try and pay for people who have got children taken into care. That's the context of the difficult financial situation we've got. So if we
look at the full context, right, and this has to be mentioned, because to what extent is that self-inflicted? I mean, you know, are you now perhaps regretting the interest-free loans that were given to Robin Hood Energy and never paid back, right? I mean, that has been widely discussed. It's the elephant in the room, right? So, I mean, we know that the council has legal obligations to provide adult social care, housing, etc., and it is a disgrace that that has to be financed by the one-off sale of assets. But if you still have those reserves that were pumped into Robin Hood Energy and never came back, then we wouldn't be in this situation.
Well, that's about a third of the story, Rob, because the 34 million loss on Robin Hood Energy is about 3% of the overall losses that we've had from lack of government grant. So we've lost about 100 million a year for 10 years on the trot. So that's about £1 billion we've lost from government grant. Now,
how could that change if we get a Labour government later this year, though? So presumably, once your mate Keir Starmer is crowned in Westminster, then it's a completely different ball game. You're not going cap in hand to Michael Gove anymore, are you? You're going to a Labour government. So that could change in a year. And meanwhile, Forest could be back in the Championship and wouldn't have all of that Sky TV money. So we could be in a situation here where you're negotiating with Forest saying, we're penniless, please help us out, and you're a rich Premier League club. And within 2 or 3 years, the roles could be reversed. Your coffers could be filled by a new Labour government, and Forest could be down in the Championship, well, God help us, League One. And then they'd be saying, well, who signed up to this £1 million a year rent? This is killing us. So can you see it from their point of view that it's a substantial risk in doing that?
Absolutely. And that's why you'd never sign up a contract like that, would you? That wouldn't look at relegation clauses and all the rest of it. So all of those things should be part of any negotiation.
Have they been, though? Has that been, is that kind of flexibility there?
I'm not involved in that level of detail, Rob, because I'm a councillor, not an officer. But, you know, the club would rightly want to put that on the table. And as a fan, I would expect to see that. And as a councillor, I would think that would be perfectly reasonable to look at, well, what rent would you be paying if you're in the Championship? What rent would you be paying if you're in League One? Absolutely. You know, and subsequently, on the other way, if Forest were in the Europa League or even the Champions League in 5-10 years, you know, does that change the situation? So what we can't do is get into a speculation about what Labour might give the council in, you know, October, next April, whatever, because the reality is, you know, there hasn't been loads of noises coming out of the Labour front bench on lots of money for public services. Things might ease up a little bit, but, you know, we are still faced with the fact that we have a lot of property that we have to either get a commercial rent for at market value, or we have to sell. And the Forest ground in that respect is no different to lots of other buildings that we've got.
Is that an option then? When you say sell, presumably there should be an option for Forest simply to just buy the freehold from you. Is that on the table?
That's a question.
That's been on the table all along.
So in essence, Forest could buy the land and own it.
Yeah. And again, the differences, and I'm not going to go into the exact figures, but the differences between what we had it valued at and what the club offered, you know, marginal in the terms of what we've seen spent as fans on wages for top players or transfer fees for players who haven't even kicked a ball for us.
So that's quite interesting, Steve, because it's nothing we've seen from the club. If they have done, I've missed it, where they've talked about the negotiation of buying the land itself. It almost seems to be constantly about this rent issue, as Rob was alluding to, the 250k versus the £1 million. So do you feel, I know you can't speak on behalf of the club for this, but do you feel that's not an option they want to pick up?
You'd have to ask them. It's an option we put to them. And as we put out in the press release yesterday, which we only put out, by the way, because of Danny's article.
Yeah.
We didn't want to get into this debate. I didn't want to be on this podcast. Much rather be talking about Forest matches that I've been to and all the rest of it. But we only put that out because it looked like a fairly one-sided article from Danny. And I like Danny. I've told him that personally. So I'm not speaking out of turn. And I think we just had to set the record straight that we're not trying to hold the club to ransom here. We're really not. We've reiterated in our press release yesterday that we're waiting for them to come back with alternative plans.
Okay, so coming back to the point that we just discussed, which was about whether Forest could buy the freehold. I'm not an accountant, but it would seem to me that if they were to purchase the freehold from you, that would be a one-off payment that could be capitalised, and then it would actually save the club £250,000 a year of operating costs, which would then improve the position in terms of profit and sustainability, and that money would therefore be available to spend on players or whatever the club would do. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and as far as we were concerned, that was always an option. And both on the lease figures and on the sale figures, we are some way apart, but I don't think it's insurmountable. And that's why I think we need to get people back around the table and see what's possible.
Well, this makes eminent sense. But my question is, Steve, is like within the council, whose job is it to get on the phone to the club? Because it seems like both sides are waiting for the other to get in touch. And
well, that's not the case, Rob. We have given the club our valuations based on external valuations. We had a meeting with them to discuss it. Broadly, the club said they didn't agree with the figures, and we've been waiting for them to come back with different proposals and or different valuation, or tell us something materially that they don't agree with in the valuations or whatever. So, we do think we're waiting for them to come back to us. But I say I don't want to get into a big who said she said, but that is the reality, and that's the only reason we've commented over the last 24 hours, because the article made it look like we deliberately weren't talking to them, and that's just not the case.
It has, to be honest, it has felt that a lot of the statements coming out of the club have been pointing the finger back towards you guys. So are you saying now you guys feel like the ball is in Forest court at the moment and you're waiting on a response? Would that be a fair assessment, or
I think that's
can you guys start the dialogue up just to get it moving?
And look, we can all admit that things can always be better, aren't we? No one's perfect.
Yeah.
We're about to have a new leader of the City Council from a week on Monday. Maybe that's a fresh start. The new leader goes and meets Tom or something. Let's get the season out of the way. Let's get the Chelsea game and the Burnley game out of the way. Let's know what division the club are in. Let's know what where we are. But as far as I'm concerned, we should be working to resolve this, because I'd like to see the club stay at City Ground. I think the vast majority of fans would. Are we going to stay there for life? Who knows? Because nobody knows how football changes and takes off. If we were this is me talking as a fan again, but if we'd had 10 years sustained membership of the Premier League with a 42,000 seater stadium, and we were filling that out regularly, and we were potentially losing out on another 20,000 people who wanted to come, then the club might then want to look at if we can't get any more in the City Grounds after that, do they want to build somewhere? But we're not at that stage, are we? Like you said earlier, Rob, we could be in the Championship next year if we lose the next two games and Luton win there. So I think we need to see what's possible for both sides. It certainly needs to be resolved. Both, Rushcliffe Council, I suspect, want Forest to stay. So there's some contradictions there, isn't there? The county council might want to sell them a plot of land at Toton, but I suspect Rushcliffe would quite like them to stay where they are.
What's your view on the Toton site then? Just as a fan, what do you think about that proposal?
Well, I can't get past the phrase that you'd never sing the mist rolling in from Toton sidings, as Pete Blackburn said on a different podcast. I mean, I don't think it's a runner personally. I think it has all the hallmarks of a bit of a soulless bowl that we've criticised as fans ourselves when we've gone to some of these places that end up being in on a industrialist site somewhere. I'm not saying all those I'm not saying all those stadiums are terrible, but quite a lot of them are. I don't think there's a massive infrastructure around the place. I'm not sure about the transport links there. It wouldn't feel like Nottingham. It's technically closer to Derby,
which is never a good thing. So, but do you feel that the club is seriously considering this, or that it's basically
a negotiation
tactic?
Well, this is where we get into the rounds of speculation, isn't it? But I've read a hell of a lot on this over the past few weeks. I think when the club first talked about it, I think they did an interview with the BBC in about February, and I think at that time people said, "Oh, this is a threat." They're just threatening to try and get a better deal with the council. And then when it's come out again now, again, this is speculation. I don't know for a fact that this is happening. But this is speculation that, I think they've been out and had a look at the site, and they've been measuring up for curtains, sort of thing. So maybe there's a bit more to it than just a negotiating tactic. And it might be that some people in the club think that the ambition of the owner is for a 50,000-60,000 stadium, all singing, all dancing stadium with a training ground next to it and a couple of hotels and a right big sporting complex that other clubs have. And I know that Tom's made the point about, if you look at the top 10 clubs in the Premier League, they're all got grounds that are 45,000 and above. And that's the ambition of the owner, clearly. Now, great if we can sustain that.
So does it not concern you then that the longer that this lease issue goes unresolved, the more that plan starts to gather moss, as it were, and pick up momentum, and then it becomes harder to stop?
Yeah, and I think the fans should have a say in it as well. Personally, as a fan, at some point they're going to have a consultation with fans, and I think there's been a bit of around the houses with it, haven't there, with a fans advisory board.
Well, the thing is with that, the club can pick whichever fans it wants to speak to based on whatever answer they want. So that's not exactly a perfect mechanism. But I do worry that you guys are waiting for the phone to ring, and in the meantime, this is picking up momentum to the point where it actually becomes a serious plan and becomes unstoppable. So, I mean, what I'm saying is, like, what are you doing other than coming on today? And thank you for that. But what are you doing to break the impasse, as it were?
Well, I spoke to Tom yesterday because, it's breaking off in the media and, on Twitter and in the Athletic. So, I reiterated again, let's keep talking, let's try and get people together. And, the stuff that we put out as a press release, we're reiterating to the club all the time. Just respond back to us to the last meeting that we had.
So here's an idea I saw on Twitter, and I'm just interested in what your comment is on this. So if we were talking about a different piece of land, there is actually a quite a large square piece of land, sort of next to the BBC and the NHS walk-in centre and the incinerator, but there's like that old British Waterways building. So that's been talked about. Now, that would be even closer to the centre and even closer to the station. And presumably the city council owns that land, right? So I mean,
the lease type on that, I think, is not.
Yeah, exactly.
Correct,
So it's something to do with like it's industrial zoning or something.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't Sim City or whatever. Can't you just like rezone it as sporting or whatever? What about that? You know, if what I'm saying is, if the club is hell bent on pursuing a brand new, built from scratch, 50,000 all-seater stadium, haven't you got sort of that piece of land or other pieces of land that you could say, okay, if this is what you want to do, how about this? I mean, is that up for discussion?
Keep it more central, yeah.
I've heard it speculated about, but also I know that the club have asked the question, and I know that we've already responded to the club on it. And I know
about that piece of land specifically, or
so people talk about it as the bit as you walk down London Road from Trent Bridge, from the City Ground towards the station. So you're walking down London Road, and you've got the canal, and then just over the back, I think there's a Virgin Active gym, but there's a big next to that. There's a big council compound, and there's a couple of council depots there. It's where the bin wagons are stored, but there's also an incinerator there, and then there's some general wasteland behind it. Now, I'm told from the club's point of view, they've looked at it aerially and they think it's a big enough site. The slight problem, and it is, quite a big problem, is there's a big incinerator there, so which burns waste. So that would have to be knocked down, moved somewhere else. There's all sorts of ecological and environmental issues surrounding that.
Actually, on that point, I have to ask, right? Is the city centre an ideal place for an incinerator? Because I mean, like, people are not allowed to have.
Oh God! Now we're going off topic.
Inside the city.
Rob, I mean, I love this. I love this conversation, but I'd have to get my colleagues who know about this sort of stuff to talk to you. But the reality is, even something like that has a lifespan, and I think it will probably go to when its lifespan is, and then that might be the end of it. But it's there, and it provides heating. It provides district heating to about 8,000 properties in the city and in the city centre. So, it sounds, whenever anybody raises it, it sounds a great idea, but when you look at the practicalities of it, it's quickly unravels.
But that piece of land, leaving out the incinerator, that piece of land has a larger footprint than the current city ground, right? I mean, I
would think so. Yeah.
I mean, looking back, I've looked into it. That piece of land has been vacant since it was bombed in the Second World War. The railway sidings were a target for the Luftwaffe, right? And it's had nothing on it.
Yeah, it's not all vacant, because there is the incinerator there, the district heating system, but there's also 2 council depots, etc.
Yeah, now Forest is trying to squeeze in between the boat club and these houses in West Bridgend. That space would be fantastic for them. It's a tight fit.
You find a consultant that knows about knocking incinerators down and rebuilding them somewhere, and offer your services to both the club and the council.
You make a lot of money, Rob. Yeah.
No, but we're going to. But we're on a fast track to Toton at the moment, and that site, it doesn't seem like. I mean, the problem with that site is you have to have a car to go there.
Yeah,
you have to have a car.
Just on that one, Steve. Would that then cause who would it cause the issue to there in terms of infrastructure, be it transportation and stuff? Is that something Forest would have to get involved in, or would there be pressure on you guys to have to build some infrastructure? Maybe
for Toton?
Yeah. If that were to happen.
That would be completely outside the City Council's remit, because you've got Broxtowe Borough Council would be the planning authority. And so there'd be some mix-up between Broxtowe Borough Council and the County Council. So it's not out; it would be outside the city. We don't own the land, but in terms of transport links, I mean, there'd have to be some serious consideration of transport links. Maybe the new mayor's office would have a look at it, because they'll maybe get some money for transport infrastructure. So it would be a major project, wouldn't it, if they were going to build a brand new stadium?
But what I'm saying, there would have to be a consideration from whoever's in charge of it to supply the infrastructure, and I assume would Forest have to be involved in that as well?
Oh yeah. What they'd have to put in a planning application to Broxtowe Borough Council to build a stadium on land that's in their borough. And how planning authorities work is they then say yes, subject to, and then they list all the conditions, and transport and how people get to the venue and where people park is a massive consideration. You know, you look at what happened in Brighton. Yes, you can build a new stadium, but you can't have any cars within a 6-mile radius of it, won't it? You know, I've been to Brighton away, and you end up on a train waiting for a train line for an hour after a game. But
just a layman question here: if it were to happen, let's just play devil's advocate, and Forest left the city ground, what could we expect to happen to the actual stadium or ground? Should I say?
There's another question, isn't it? Because if Forest give up the lease, then the land reverts to the city council, and you'd have to look in whether there were covenants there about what it could be used for or whatever. If the club bought the land, then they could still move, couldn't they? Technically, and they could redevelop the land for something else. But that's where I think this all falls down, is if the club want to get more people in the ground ASAP, surely you do that by expanding the existing ground. That's got to be a quicker fix than building a ground from scratch. The only argument for building a ground from scratch is you use the old ground while you're doing it, and then you move in.
Because you'd have to close the stand down while it gets redeveloped, which means less income coming in. So you could almost see them running in parallel if they did move it to another site.
But I mean, I remember the argument. I went to the presentation that Forest did in 2019 at the ground, and they were talking about we'd knock the stand down at the end of a close season. We'd try and get a couple of games towards the end of the season to be away. We'd then have half the stand up by Christmas, and people could move into the lower bit, and we'd have it all done by the end of the season. And clubs are quite adept at this these days, aren't they? Stands are going up left, right, and centre in places, not just in the UK but around the world. So there is expertise out there about how you can do things a bit quicker.
And I think, just to close off, because you've been more than generous with your time, I do appreciate it, Steve. What's the next step? So if the club were watching and we could send them a message to get things moving, because I think from a fan's perspective, I don't know if you guys would agree, but we just want to know the resolution of it. And let's not do anything till at least Sunday, hopefully once West Ham have beaten Luton. But going forward, what needs to be the next steps to start to add a bit of pace to the momentum of this?
So my hope now is that we can get everybody around the table, that we take the opportunity of the new leader of the council coming in a week on Monday to sit down with the Forest leadership at the end of the season, see if they can come up with an alternative proposal in terms of the funding, see if they've got an alternative valuation, if they want to show any further consideration of that, and try and get an agreement to move forward. If the club alternatively have explored things with the county council and they're really keen to explore a move, then we probably just need that clarification as well from the club.
Yeah, fantastic. Steve, as I said, you've been more than generous with your time. I want to thank you for taking time. I think it's been a fascinating discussion to see it from the opposing sides and what you're dealing with. And as we mentioned at the start, we've heard a lot from the Forest side about what's been happening, but not too much from the council. And guys, if you want to follow Steve, he is on Twitter, and it's Battlemuch4WW, I believe, is your handler on there. I'll leave that for you guys in the description down below. But Rob, any closing thoughts from yourself before I hand over to Steve for the final words? If I could
just reiterate what I said earlier, which is, I think while this is allowed to drift, I think we are drifting into a move to Toton, because the more time and the more emotional energy that gets expended in that, and the more it's actually talked about, the more people start to look at the idea maybe through rose-tinted glasses. Yeah, wouldn't it be nice to have a season ticket? I'm on a waiting list of 11,000 people. So But what I would say to you is that, you know, just think about who you're dealing with here. Like, Mr. Marinakis doesn't like to be pushed around, is my reading of this situation. And I think it's important to understand what he's done for the city to date, and just to maybe just take that into account, because I think this kind of standoff, it could end up in a resolution that hurts both parties. And, you know, we've got enough problems with Premier League referees and all of the other things that are against us without sort of fighting among ourselves.
Yeah, I just want to say, Rob, I accept that. I personally, but I know the council itself is incredibly proud of the achievements of Forest. The name recognition that Nottingham Forest have brought to the city of Nottingham over the last 45 years is incredible. You know, people talk about us around the world and they come to the city, international visitors. You know, we've got now in our tourist information office, 2/3 of our tourist information office is the Forest Club shop. You know, that's incredible. It's just around the corner from the Brian Clough statue. We hosted in the council house the celebrations for getting back into the Premiership. That was a brilliant day. You know, the players on the balcony of the council house and 30,000 plus people in the market square. You know, an absolutely brilliant day. So we're incredibly proud of the connection with the club that was founded in the city of Nottingham, and we want it to be part of the fabric of the city going forward, even though technically it's 500 yards over the border.
Yeah. I just want to say thank you again, Steve. Guys, once you've watched this, get your comments in down below. I'll be fascinated to hear your thoughts on what Steve had to said. And does this open your eyes a little? Do you see this debate, whatever you want to call it, in slightly different lenses now, having heard what Steve's had to say about it? So please don't forget to hit that like button if you haven't already. Subscribe to Forest Fan TV if you are new, and we'll see you on the next video. Again, thank you to Steve and thank you to Rob. You Reds.
Thank you much.